Welcome to this plenary meeting. Before we begin, I want to set out a few points. This meeting will be held in a hybrid format with some members in the Senedd chamber and others joining by video conference. All members participating in Senedd proceedings, wherever they may be, will be treated equally. A plenary meeting held using video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act 2006. Some of the provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary meeting, and these are noted on your agenda. And I would remind members that standing orders relating to order in plenary meetings apply to this meeting and apply equally to members in the chamber as to those joining virtually. With those few words, the first item on our agenda is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Delyth Jewell.
Will the First Minister make a statement about the importance of increasing public understanding of politics in Wales?
So I thank Delyth Jewell for that question. Increasing the public's understanding of democracy in Wales and throughout the world has never been more important. I have today written to President-elect Biden to congratulate him on his victory in last week's elections in the United States. Decision-making in the Senedd during the coronavirus crisis has demonstrated the significance of politics in everyone's lives in an unprecedented way.
Thank the First Minister for his answer. I'm sure that he, as he has just said, has been following not only the results of the US election, but the fascinating coverage that has been of it. I'm delighted by the Democrats' victory against probably the worst US president in history. And I'm glad that the First Minister has joined me in congratulating Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on their victory. But that detailed coverage stands in contrast with the situation in Wales, where people have to go out of their way to ascertain facts. Cardiff University's 2016 Welsh election study paints a bleak picture of political understanding of Senedd elections. Findings include half the population didn't know the Welsh Government is in charge of health and education, and 40% believe Plaid Cymru were a party of government between 2011 and 16. Now, we know the reason for this. Most Welsh citizens get their news from London-based media. The same study shows only 6% of Welsh voters read Welsh papers. In Scotland, it's 46%. So does the First Minister share my concern about these figures? And does he agree it's not the fault of Welsh citizens, but rather it's that they're being let down by the current media landscape? And if so, will he be willing to work cross-party to explore ways to properly inform the public ahead of next year's election?
So I thank Delyth Jewell for those supplementary questions. I agree with her that the weakness of the Welsh media has always been a challenge in communicating the significance of devolution here in Wales, and that stands in a significant contrast to the position in Scotland, for example, where Scottish citizens are much more likely to get their news from a Scottish source rather than relying on sources beyond Scotland, as we have so many of our citizens relying on sources beyond Wales. I do think the experience of this year has had a significant impact, however, on the recognition by people in Wales of the fact that devolution and this Senedd is in charge of so many aspects of their lives that have made such a difference over these months. I'm very happy to commit to working with others to raise the awareness of the forthcoming elections here in Wales and of Welsh democracy earlier in this Senedd term. As part of a budget agreement with Plaid Cymru, we found some money for hyperlocal media here in Wales, and that has been significant during this pandemic crisis as well.
Angela Burns.
Thank you for your answer to Delyth Jewell, First Minister, but of course the media is only part of the solution. Education plays a vital part, and with the next Welsh general election seeing the franchise being extended to include 16-year-olds, it is essential that young people gain an objective, fair and balanced view on the important role that politics plays in all of our lives. The new curriculum states one of its core purposes is to ensure that our young people are able to become ethically and informed citizens of Wales, but it has failed to include learning about politics as a compulsory part of this. Politics is more than just putting a cross in the box but understanding what change that cross can affect. Will you pledge to look again at the call, supported by the Electoral Reform Society, to enshrine political education into the curriculum, to ensure that Wales is able to fully realise her aim of empowering our young people with the knowledge as they enter into adulthood?
Well, Llywydd, I agree with Angela Burns about the importance of education in relation to 16 and 17-year-olds. It's one of the reasons why I was attracted to supporting that proposition, because young people will still be in compulsory education and will have an opportunity to become those ethically informed citizens of Wales and the world in a way that is not possible for many young people when they had already left school before becoming 18. But I don't agree with the member that preparation is not possible within the new curriculum. The humanities area of learning and experience will deliver exactly what she is looking for without freighting down the curriculum with another specific area by itself. I've lost count of the number of times in this chamber that I have heard speeches by members arguing for some specific niche to be identified separately within the curriculum. And the whole purpose of our reform has not to be to proceed in that way. It has been to provide broad areas and then to give the responsibility to those in the classroom who know their pupils the best, who understand the context in which they are delivering the curriculum, and they will do what Angela Burns has asked, I am sure, in preparing our young people to participate in Welsh democracy. Last Thursday, Llywydd, the Welsh Government's commissioned educational resources in advance of next May's elections went live, live hosted on the Hub platform available to schools in every part of Wales.
Alan Davis.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And like you, First Minister, I was delighted to see President-elect Biden win the election last week. I was therefore surprised to learn before joining the meeting today that he did in fact lose the election last week and that he is no longer President-elect. This news was brought to me by an American website, which was fact-checked by another website and supported by a different news website. All of those news items, of course, are fake and false and wrong and designed not to inform, but to misinform and mislead. And one of my great concerns, and we have an election coming up ourselves in 6 months' time, and one of my great concerns is that the understanding of politics in Wales is being undermined by dark money, by foreign-funded media or organisations which seek to debase and undermine our politics. We saw this during the Brexit referendum, we've seen it repeatedly since then, and we've seen it in the United States today. Do you agree with me, First Minister, that if we're to ensure that people have a proper, fair understanding of politics and current affairs in Wales, not only do we need to do all the things which you've already debated and discussed, but we also need regulation of the financing of politics in the United Kingdom and regulation of social media?
Well, Llywydd, I very much share Alan Davis's concerns at the way in which modern social media, which on the whole is a huge boon to us, but it nevertheless exposes our democracy to attacks from people who are not interested for one moment in making sure that we have ethically informed young people with an understanding of, an interest in and an engagement with Welsh democracy, but instead peddle a very particular and sinister line about the way in which government can play a part in their lives and they themselves can participate in the democratic process. And we're not immune from that here in Wales. As I know Alan Davis has himself made a particular point of drawing to people's attention. Those forces operate in Wales as well as anywhere else, and they will play their part if we allow them to in our own elections in May, which is why the calls that Alan Davis made at the end of his contribution to make sure that the proper regulation of this part of the world is seriously considered by government, and that we don't allow our politics to become infected by money from elsewhere in the world designed not to inform or to educate, but to mislead and to persuade people that things that they are fearful of in their lives are very different to the reality that we understand.
Cwestiwn 2, Hefyn David.
Will the First Minister provide an update on the easing of coronavirus restrictions in Caerphilly?
Thank the member for that, Llywydd. From the 9th of November, citizens of Caerphilly will help deal with coronavirus through a new set of national rules. Nowhere has more been asked of people in Wales than in Caerphilly, and I thank all of those who have made such efforts to keep themselves and others safe and well.
I'd like to thank the First Minister once again for recognising the efforts we've made longer than anyone else in Wales in Caerphilly, and we made a great deal of progress early on in arresting the growth of the virus in our communities. Many people are emailing me now and asking questions about a vaccine. We heard news breaking yesterday about progress made by Pfizer and a possible vaccine. My view is that we need to treat this announcement with caution, and we must emphasise the fact that people must continue to abide by the restrictions that the Welsh Government has in place in order to protect the NHS and to save lives. But can I ask the First Minister what plans he has to prepare Wales for a potential vaccine, what communication he's had with the UK Government, and how this may help us, with that cautious reservation in place, may help us in the future?
Thank you, David, for that, Llywydd. And let me begin just by associating myself with his opening remarks. I think there's a lot to be concerned at the triumphalist way in which some of the right-wing press in the United Kingdom have reported Pfizer's announcement. Of course, it's welcome that their stage 3 trial has met with success, but that is not the end of the story at all. There are very important further steps that have to be taken before that vaccine or any of the other 11 vaccines that are at stage 3 trials might finally come to fruition. And I really, really do not want people in Wales to take the wrong message from what was being said yesterday. We will be fighting coronavirus with the current armoury that we have at our disposal for many months to come. And while we look forward to the day when there is a vaccine, we need to be cautious in the way we approach it and not persuade people to act as though coronavirus is over and help is just around the corner. It really isn't going to be like that. In the meantime, we have an agreement with the UK Government. My colleague Vaughan Gethin, in a meeting with other health ministers across the United Kingdom on Thursday of last week, agreeing a whole series of measures. We will receive our population share of any virus, of any vaccine once it becomes properly approved and available. The planning for its storage and distribution will be in the hands of the Welsh Government. And in relation to the Pfizer vaccine, that is a particularly important responsibility, because this is a vaccine that can only properly be stored at very low temperatures indeed, far different to the way in which those who've been to have their flu vaccination at a GP surgery will see it stored in an ordinary fridge and absolutely safely in that way. The Pfizer vaccine is nothing like that at all, and the logistical issues that will fall to the Welsh Government are very real, but have been in preparation for many months. And when we get to a point where there is a vaccine that is genuinely safe and known to be so and for use in the population, then we will be prepared and ready to do that here in Wales.
Laura Ann Jones.
Thank you. First Minister, yes, it's very welcome news about the vaccine, but as you say, people need to continue to act sensibly. And obviously safety comes first, but I have a question for you that I probably did not make as clear as I should have done last week, and that's on football. So it affects clubs that have come to me from Caerphilly, South Wales, East, and of course it affects the whole of Wales. On the 30 outside rule, post-fire break rule, obviously I'm a football fan, so I know there is 11 aside in a football match, but in the rule of 30, you have 11 aside if a football teams want to play each other, one sub each, one manager and one coach, and then there's enough room for a ref and a first aider. But there is no room for linesmen, and there obviously is no room for any more subs. So I was just wondering, First Minister, that's okay for training and it's okay sort of for friendlies, a bit of a strain on just having one sub. But First Minister, if our clubs are to go back into start their season, they've started in England, they're just on pause. If they're going to start their seasons here in Wales, how do you propose they do that if the Rule 30 obviously only means that they can have those people on the pitch, but they can't have the linesmen and everything like that? Is there going to be some concession to ensure that they can support it, start their seasons? I just wonder if you could explain it a bit more for me, please, First Minister, or look into it. Thank you.
Well, so I understand the constraints that there are when you have a maximum number of people who can participate in an organised event in the outdoors. But the rules are there for a reason. And that the biggest threat that we all face is from the reoccurrence of coronavirus. And the 30 number is designed to try to limit the risks that come with people meeting in any context in the outdoors. And a challenge as it is, and I do understand why these constraints are real for people who have to organise those activities. They're there for a very good and important reason. And it is only when we are more confident that we are genuinely suppressing the virus here in Wales that it will be possible to offer any further concessions. Now we continue to discuss these things all the time with the governing bodies, and we all look forward to the point when we will be able to offer more to people who give their time, give their commitment to organising teams and making sure that young people in particular can take part in them. But we're not at that point. We're at a point where we still have more people in our hospitals today and more people in critical care than we did back in May of this year. So until we are at that point where things are improving and improving significantly, we've designed the system as best we can, and we have to ask people to be able to operate within it.
Cwestiwn yn organ arweinwyr y pleidiau.
Questions draft from the party leaders. Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price.
First Minister, we will all, of course, naturally be encouraged by the glimmer of hope we saw yesterday. But as you say yourself, a vaccine should not be regarded as a silver bullet, certainly at this stage in the pandemic. But it is, nevertheless, the news was, I think, potentially a silver lining of what's been a dark and difficult year so far. Could you say a little bit more about the plans that you referred to in your answer earlier? Are you planning, on, at least on a contingency basis, if the necessary approvals are delivered, for the potential for the vaccine to be rolled out initially next month? And could you say a little bit more about the logistical plans that you referred to? So, are you looking at potentially a network of mass immunisation centres, drive-through centres that have been suggested, possibly roving immunisation teams and temporary pop-up facilities in GP surgeries? And who is coordinating and leading this effort across government? And in terms of the refrigeration question you referred to, of course, there was a discussion about refrigeration capacity in relation to a no-deal Brexit and medicines a year ago, and we may be in that position again. Are you satisfied that we have the capacity in the cold chain in order to deal with the virus potentially?
So I thank Adam Price for those important questions, and I think his description of it as a glimmer of hope is a good one, because I think that is what it is. It is hopeful, and we need a bit of hope in these difficult times, but we mustn't exaggerate it either. It is the Chief Medical Officer's office in Wales that is in charge of planning for any vaccine that becomes available to us. The Chief Medical Officer was involved in this as far back as June and was in correspondence with our health boards in July to make sure the plans are in place. On the storage issue, I think our current expectation is that if it were to be the Pfizer vaccine that was available first, with its need to be stored at below minus 75 degrees centigrade, then we would use the facilities available to the Welsh Blood Service. which does have facilities and in different parts of Wales that are able to keep things refrigerated at that temperature. But there are complications. My understanding of this vaccine is that it can only be taken out of refrigeration on 4 occasions before it's no longer capable of being used. So there are some very real constraints with it. It has to be administered twice, as I know the member will know, at a 3-week interval, and it doesn't become effective until the first week after the second dose of the vaccine has been delivered. So there's another set of difficult complications there. We don't yet know as to whether or not it will be effective in older people. And that's particularly a challenge at the moment because the Welsh plan, which is very similar to plans elsewhere in the United Kingdom, is to begin with priority groups and to begin with priority staff who are capable of administering the vaccine. So our plan is that we would start with experienced vaccinators, people who do this all the time, and then we would expand beyond that. So that's in terms of delivering the vaccine. In terms of who will get the vaccine, until we're certain, more certain than we are now, as to which groups in the population this particular vaccine will be effective, then we're likely to start with healthcare staff, social care staff, to make sure that frontline workers who are regularly in contact with people with coronavirus are vaccinated. And then, if it is effective with older people, then it will be care home residents and people in later stages of life that would get the next priority. So it's a priority system. It'll depend on how quickly the vaccine becomes available. We'll get a population share of it here in Wales, but there are a lot of questions which we will not yet know the answers to. As those answers emerge, we will be able to firm up the programme that we will have for delivering the vaccine to those who need it the most first.
The Scottish Government has said that it's agreed for its vaccine quota, if you like, to be determined on a population share basis because there's minimal difference between that and calculating on something more like a needs-based formula. You've said in the past, First Minister, that in the context of COVID, Wales has a greater vulnerability because it's older, sicker and poorer than average. So will you be making the case for our allegation to reflect a greater than population share on this basis? And in terms of the prioritisation issue, which you just referred to, and the interim order of prioritisation set out by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation on the 25th of September, which you said that we would broadly be following. Have you looked at alternative methods for prioritisation? For example, the Oxford Risk Prediction Tool, which stratifies the population according to a wider list of risk factors. In particular, will you be prioritising the rollout of the vaccine in communities with demonstrably greater risk of infection for principally areas of high socioeconomic deprivation, the BME communities, and areas with higher levels of infection?
So because of the speed at which we will need to move in the first instance, we've agreed a population share for Wales. That doesn't mean to say that we can't return to that, but in the first instance, getting our population share will allow us to get the programme going, and we're likely to be guided in the first instance as well by the advice of the JCVI, which we've had a long history of engagement with, and who do understand some of the particular challenges we face in relation to the Welsh population. None of that, however, means that once we've got this vaccination programme underway, that we are not able to fine-tune it, both by looking to see whether we have a case for additional volumes of vaccine coming to Wales, and to make sure that the prioritisation that we agree is fine-tuned to meet the needs of the Welsh population. And I agree, of course, with Adam Price that there are particular groups in the population, BAME community certainly, who have a greater vulnerability to this virus, and therefore in a prioritisation system you'd want to pay some proper attention to that.
While we await the rollout of an effective vaccine, other methods of avoiding a over-reliance on lockdowns as a primary policy tool are important, of course, which is why the mass testing programme being piloted in Liverpool and the example that we had in Slovakia are important. The latest available data shows the weekly rate of COVID in Liverpool is 300 per 100,000 population. The corresponding figures for Merthyr Tydfil, Rhondda Cynon and Blaenau Gwent are all above 400 cases per 100,000 of the population. While bearing in mind the advice of SAGE that mass testing should complement rather than replace track and trace, is there not a compelling case for the urgent rollout of a similar mass testing programme in these areas in Wales? I read today that England is talking about 66 local authorities being part of the next wave of the mass testing programme. Can you confirm, First Minister, whether the Welsh Government is actively planning a similar programme in these areas in Wales and to do so at scale and at pace?
So with mass testing does have a potentially very important role to play. We will learn a great deal from the Liverpool experiment. It's not straightforward. If you go for whole population testing, you're doing it on a voluntary basis. There are very significant logistical issues to consider, and the testing is only one part of it, because you have to have everything in place to deal with the additional number of people who you will undoubtedly discover as being positive with coronavirus if you test in that way. We are engaged with a Liverpool pilot. We are purposefully planning for the way in which we could use mass population, whole town testing, as it's called here in Wales. And I think that by learning from the very early lessons that are emerging already from the Liverpool experience, we will be able to mount a whole town approach to testing in a way that will be more immediately effective. And I want to make sure that when the moment comes that we're able to do that here in Wales, we've done all the preparatory work so that it delivers for that local population.
Leader of the Conservatives, Paul Davies.
First Minister, you will have seen the very worrying concerns from some health experts that as many as 2,000 people in Wales could die as a result of COVID-related delays. Professor Tom Crosby of the Wales Cancer Network has said that he fears an unprecedented tsunami of demand for cancer services is coming. What urgent action is the Welsh Government taking to address these very worrying concerns?
Well, obviously, Llywydd, the most urgent action we are taking lies in everything we are doing to turn back the tide of coronavirus. Because the biggest threat to treatments for conditions other than coronavirus comes from our NHS not having the capacity to be able to go on offering those treatments. And we are still far too close to that position in Wales today. The fire break period will, we hope, have given us the opportunity to go on in the Welsh NHS, providing cancer care, providing coronary care, providing stroke care, all those other really important things that the NHS does. But the action, the most important action we can take, and the most important action that every single citizen in Wales can take, is to do everything to turn back the tide of coronavirus, because that will mean that our health service will be able to go on doing those other things, and to do so increasingly, as it has built up its capacity to do so ever since April of this year.
Of course, and I very much agree with the First Minister. Our priority has to be tackling this virus, but of course we need to make sure as well that routine surgery and routine services are able to continue, because figures today have shown that around 49,000 patients in September had been waiting for more than a year for an NHS treatment in Wales, and that's a tenfold increase for all treatments compared to September last year. 49,000 people, with many people across the country living in pain and discomfort, waiting for treatment. And those same figures show that 18,000 people are waiting for some kind of treatment at Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board, of course, that is directly under your control. Now, the Health Minister has himself admitted that as a result there will be poorer outcomes, more people having avoidable disability, more people potentially losing their lives with non-COVID care. So, First Minister, can you tell us what discussions the Welsh Government is having with health boards across Wales about managing these waiting times and the impact that this may have on the Welsh NHS in the medium and longer term? And given the pressing nature of this matter, will you now give serious consideration to perhaps establishing COVID-free hospitals across Wales so that we can start addressing these worrying figures?
Well, Llywydd, of course, we discuss these things all the time with our local health boards. The member will see in their Q3 and Q4 plans all the actions that they are taking to try to provide for non-coronavirus care while dealing with the impact of the global pandemic. What health boards say to us is that their staff are exhausted by the experience of this year, and that we are going to be asking them again this winter to cope not just with the over 1,400 patients who are now in beds in Welsh hospitals suffering from coronavirus, but we are going to ask them to do all those other things as well. And our health boards report, as do organisations like the RCN and so on, real concerns about the resilience of our workforce and everything that we are asking of them. And much of what we are doing is to try to make sure that we look after those staff so that they can go on doing all the things that Paul Davies has suggested. The idea of coronavirus-free hospitals in Wales is a difficult one, I think. Our health boards are preferring to have green zones and red zones inside existing hospitals. I mean, I'll give him the example which he will know the best. What would he like Withybush to be? A hospital devoted to coronavirus only, so that anybody with coronavirus ends up in Withybush, or anybody in the Withybush area who has coronavirus has to go somewhere else for their care, because Withybush has become a non-COVID hospital. And that's a difficult issue, as he will recognise, in every part of Wales, isn't it? Because we have rural communities with single hospitals, small often in scale, doing everything that is needed for that local population. And if you're in a very big metropolitan area where you've got hospitals close by to one another, then maybe that is a viable possibility. I think it's much harder to make it fit the geography and the population distribution in Wales.
First Minister, of course, it is critical that the Welsh Government explores every opportunity to resume non-COVID care so that people can access vital treatments as soon as possible. And it's deeply worrying to hear the Health Minister say it would be foolish to have a plan for backlogs before the pandemic is over. Now, it's also crucial that the Welsh Government considers how it also supports our NHS workers at this time, as the First Minister has just referred to. The Royal College of Nursing in Wales have made it clear an increasing number of staff are actually accessing mental health support due to the pandemic. So it's absolutely critical that a strategy to support the NHS workforce is delivered to nurture and indeed support our frontline staff. So can you tell us how is the Welsh Government responding to the concerns of the Royal College of Nursing and indeed others regarding the impact on NHS workers? And can you tell us what workforce planning is actually currently taking place? And should there be further pressures on the NHS in the future, how will the Welsh Government protect and support our NHS workers in the face of those pressures?
Well, I do entirely agree, Llywydd, and said so myself in answer to Paul Davies' second question, that one of the real constraints we face this winter is in the finite number of staff that we have, the experience they have all gone through, the fact that as frontline staff they are particularly vulnerable themselves to contracting coronavirus. Their recovery is no different to anybody else and is often a long and difficult one. So I said to the Leader of the Opposition that the Q3 and Q4 plans from our NHS colleagues focus particularly on making sure that we can sustain our staff through this very difficult period. We've provided new services available to the whole breadth of NHS staff in relation to mental health. We've provided further training to staff to be able to deal with a broader range of demands that will come their way. But when we look forward to a winter in which coronavirus shows very little sign of going away, where we've yet to begin the flu season, where winter brings with it all the other things that we know happen when you have an older, sicker, more vulnerable population, as Adam Price says, then doing everything we can to support our colleagues in the health service is top of my agenda and that of the Health Minister here. Some of the things we were able to use earlier in the year are not so easily available to us. We were, as Paul Davis will know, back in April and May, able to recruit students who were just finishing their courses. They were ready to be deployed in clinical circumstances. That isn't the case in November and December. We recruited back into the service people who had recently retired and were willing to come back. We may well be looking to people to help us in that way again. And the good news is that despite all of this, recruitment to the Welsh NHS does go on being very successful. We have filled our GP training rotas and overfilled them this year compared to any other year, including in North Wales, which the member mentioned. So the longer-term sustainability of our health service staff is based upon our ability to recruit into courses, into training schemes, and on that score, despite the very bleak year we're in, we continue to do well in Wales.
Question 3, Janet Finch-Saunders.
Diolch Llawr. Will the First Minister make a statement on non-COVID-19 related treatment in Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board?
Thank you, Llywyd. Each health board will continue to deliver essential services. The quarterly NHS Wales operating frameworks and the subsequent plans developed by health boards set out the actions being taken to increase capacity, cautiously restoring other services safely over time with a phased approach based on clinical priority.
Thank you, First Minister. And this really follows on the very pertinent points that our Welsh Conservative leader Paul Davis has raised here today. Because certainly residents and indeed patients, residents of mine and patients in Aberconway with non-COVID medical needs certainly are being left behind. I have one constituent who saw their gastro appointment cancelled in April and only secured a telephone consultation by turning and taking to Twitter. Another resident has been waiting for a double knee replacement since November 2017. And in response to another orthopaedic case, the Minister for Health wrote to me that it is difficult for the Health Board to provide an understanding of when services may return for non-urgent patients. And finally, only last week, Mark Polin, the Chairman of the Health Board, advised me that there now has been a considerable increase in the number waiting for orthopaedic appointments. Neither the Acting Chief Executive nor the Minister are able to give me dates for treatment where my patients have been waiting for this treatment that is considered in many cases to be urgent, and they are just waiting weeks and months. So what urgent steps will you take to ensure that more wards are set aside for non-COVID related treatment in North Wales? Or will you put some merit to the proposals put forward to Paul Davis today to actually open up some areas of non-COVID sort of areas where treatment can be carried out to deal certainly in the Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board with their orthopaedic crisis and other treatment requirements? Thank you.
Well, I don't think that is quite the point that Paul Davis made to me. Mr Davis was asking whether we would consider making whole hospitals non-coronavirus sites. And I explained to him why I thought that would be challenging given our geography. I think it would be challenging given our geography in North Wales. I'm not sure that the members' electors would thank her if we were to take that advice, given the implications that that would have for people suffering from coronavirus in her constituency or others. As I've said, the impact of coronavirus on our health service is profound, not simply in the number of people who are in our hospitals suffering from it, but in the ways in which clinicians now have to operate. So an operating theatre that previously would have carried out 8 orthopaedic operations in a single day is now probably only able to do 3 such procedures. And that is because the operating theatre has to be cleaned after every single operation, because clinicians are wearing full PPE in doing so. The productivity, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much we ask of our staff, coronavirus has a very, very real impact, not just on the number of people who we are able to draw into the system, but the rate at which our clinicians are able to treat them. Now, the Health Minister made a statement here in the Senedd last week setting out plans for Betsy Cadwallader. I'm sure the member will have welcomed the £30 million extra a year for the next 3.5 years that will be provided by the Welsh Government to make sure that we have a sustained unscheduled care and planned care programme, including orthopaedics, in North Wales. And I look forward to the new Chief Executive's arrival in the beginning of January, and for her now to be able to plan for the future of services in North Wales, knowing that she has that significant additional investment available to her from which she can take on the leadership of that organisation.
Mandy Jones.
Diolch, Chloe. First Minister, the effect of the focus on COVID-19 by all health services in the UK has been well rehearsed in this chamber, as we just heard. But once again, for the record, Cancer Charities estimate that referrals for cancer screening are down by 70%. Now, even a layperson could see that the health service focus on COVID, this is a disaster waiting in the wings. Now, recent reports suggest COVID was at number 19 in the league of causes of death in Wales in September. In fact, the most prolific killers were heart disease and dementia-related illnesses. I still don't think you specifically answered Janet Finch-Saunders, so I'll ask this question with that in mind. What steps are you going to take to ensure that the Welsh NHS does not become the national COVID service? Thank you.
Well, so I completely disagree with the member, because I think her suggestion is that we have somehow over-prioritised the treatment of coronavirus patients here in Wales. Last week, Public Health Wales reported that the 2,000th patient in Wales to die from coronavirus was being reported in their statistics. I don't think those people or their families would agree with Mandy Jones that somehow we should have neglected the care of coronavirus patients in order to care for others. And she seems to deny the fact that there is a choice that has to be made here. Because the health service cannot simply manage to do everything we are asking of it in a global pandemic and carry on as though the global pandemic were not taking place. It's very easy where she sits to think that easy choices of that sort can be made. They simply don't exist in the real world. They simply don't exist in the lives of the staff that we rely on to provide these services. The single biggest contribution that can be made to making sure that non-coronavirus care can be continued is to take coronavirus seriously. That's what she fails to do, and she's doing it again this afternoon.
Question 4, Mike Hedges.
What powers does the Welsh Government have to control the use of fireworks?
Thank Mike Hedges for that, Chloe. The Welsh Government does not have any specific powers to control the use of fireworks. The sale and use of fireworks in Wales is governed by regulations under the Fireworks Act 2003. The power to make such regulations rests with UK ministers.
Can I thank the First Minister for his answer and clarification of where powers reside? Firstly, I have no problem with fireworks on the 5th of November and organised firework displays either on the 5th of November or for events like the Chinese New Year and Diwali. My concern is around the all-year use of fireworks, which affects some young children, some elderly, and especially some military personnel who could be re-traumatised by hearing an unexpected explosion, as well as the effect it has on animals. Also, I'm concerned about the effect it has on air quality. What representation has the Welsh Government made to strengthen the Fireworks Act?
Mike Hedges for that, and he rightly draws attention to the adverse impact on a whole range of individuals and other causes in our society of the irresponsible use of fireworks. Now, I know Mike Hedges will know that the House of Commons Petitions Committee reported on the sale and use of fireworks towards the end of last year. On the 14th of January, my colleagues Leslie Griffiths and Hannah Blythen wrote jointly to the UK Minister responsible for responding to that Petitions Committee report. We urge them to accept the recommendations of the report. We offered to work jointly with the UK Government on a range of issues. We specifically asked for a dialogue on reviewing local authority powers in this area. We asked for a review of decibel limits, and we pointed to the particular issue of online sales, which are currently barely covered at all by the 2003 regulatory regime. Llywydd, I've seen since that the Scottish Government has committed to introducing legislation in the Scottish Parliament using powers that they have that we don't, and their prescription for the introduction of mandatory conditions where fireworks are purchased, restricting the times of day when fireworks can be sold, restricting the days and times where fireworks can be set off, introducing no firework areas or zones. All of those seem to me sensible measures, and we will continue to advocate for them, because if they were introduced on a whole UK basis, Wales would certainly benefit.
Anne Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you for that answer, First Minister. I think it is important that action is taken to curtail the use of fireworks. There's no doubt in my mind that they've become a more frequent problem, it seems to me, from around the end of Halloween all the way through to the new year. And we know, as Mike Hedges has quite rightly pointed out, that it's not just pets, it's not just livestock, wildlife, or young children, but our military personnel in particular, those with PTSD, can suffer considerable harm, and it can trigger all sorts of awful memories for them. Can I ask you, in the meantime, if Wales doesn't have the powers to take more concerted action, what work the Welsh Government will do in order to promote the responsible use of fireworks through things like guidance, which can be disseminated then to particularly those who organise events where fireworks are going to be let off? I think that these are useful things that could be done by the Welsh Government with its existing powers. And also, of course, there's the need to educate young people in our schools. We often talk about the dangers of fireworks in our schools for young people, but we don't often talk about the impact that using them has on other people. And I think that is something which perhaps could be done.
Well, I agree with all the points that the member has made. What we want to see is responsible use of fireworks. As it happens, I quite like a good firework display myself. I enjoy seeing one. But you want to do it in a way that doesn't cause the unintended harms that Darren Miller has referred to. We have worked with our local authorities and our police here in Wales on the enforcement powers that they have. I know the member will be interested that reports from the four Welsh police forces after last week suggest quite a difference between those forces that essentially police rural areas, who reported a quiet bonfire night with very little calls on their services, and some far, far more difficult moments in the South Wales and Gwent police areas with utterly unacceptable attacks on firefighters and on police officers when called to deal with untoward incidents. We did work with the UK Government in the run-up to this bonfire night on a promotion campaign trying to persuade people to use fireworks properly and responsibly. I'm very happy to go on doing more of that, but I do think that there is a regulatory issue here. The 2003 Act was put on the statute book because of the aftermath of the millennium, when there was a widespread use of fireworks that appeared to carry on in the years immediately after it in a not very acceptable way. So the 2003 regulations did help. to put some shape around that and to bear down on the worst excesses. If we're seeing that beginning to happen again, then looking again at the regulations and doing more to make sure that fireworks are responsibly sold and responsibly used, I think would be a very good use of government time.
Helen Mary-Jones.
Grateful to the First Minister for the answers that he's already given. I mean, it's certainly the experience parts of the region that I represent. I've had unprecedented calls this last week from places like Llanelli, Pontebarem, Kidwelly, where the unregulated use of fireworks may have been greater than would normally have been the case because, of course, there were no formal displays. I was interested in what the First Minister said about the lack of powers, and obviously that's not something that can be changed quickly. And also in what the First Minister had to say about working with local authorities around enforcement and with the police service. Can I ask the First Minister today to look again at that as we run up to the new year, which is another time where we get a lot of fireworks being used, to see if there is sufficient capacity and whether some additional resources might be needed either by the police service or by local authorities to enable them to effectively police these kind of incidents, because as the First Minister has said in responding to others, this can be very distressing for individuals as well as for pets and livestock.
Yes, certainly, Llywydd. We will look to work with our police forces and our local authorities, learning the lessons from the recent days. Of course, we were in a fire break period here in Wales, which added another layer into the complexity of this. But we will want to make sure, as I said, we've got a preliminary set of reports from all 4 police forces in Wales. We'll collect information from our local authorities as well and see whether there is anything further we can do working together to plan and prepare for other parts of the year when fireworks are in widespread use.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I too wish to emphasise the impact fireworks have on people and pets each year. And Bonfire Night has become Bonfire Week in recent years, and fireworks have become increasingly more powerful. Combat veterans and pets live in fear during this period as quiet neighbourhoods resemble war zones. First Minister, what discussions have you had with the other governments in the UK about restricting the use of fireworks to certain hours, for example, between 6 and 8 p.m. on November the 5th, or preferably only allowing organised displays? Thank you.
Caroline Jones, for that. We're in discussions with BEIS, the department in the UK government, and indeed with the Scottish government over their proposals. So we're very keen to work with others on this issue. There are a range of different possible solutions, some of them that Caroline Jones referred to. But my understanding is that it is perfectly possible now to manufacture fireworks that don't have loud noises. That you can get the display without the adverse impacts that have, as we heard from Darren Miller and others, the impact on people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or animals, or very young children, who can be very frightened indeed, more by the noise than by the sight of fireworks. And if manufacturers can do that, then we may be able to bear down on the problem at source, as well as doing some of the other things that members this afternoon have suggested.
Vicky Howells.
Diolch, Llywydd. What discussions has the Welsh Government had with UK ministers regarding the future implementation of the proposed Shared Prosperity Fund?
So with minimal opportunities have been offered to discuss the Shared Prosperity Fund with UK ministers. Despite requests to do so, we do not now expect this to be made good between now and the comprehensive spending review on the 25th of November.
Thank you, First Minister. I recently met with Colegau Cymru to discuss the importance of the Shared Prosperity Fund to the future funding of skills and apprenticeships, with, as you know, European funding having been a key driver of the skills agenda. There's real concern within the sector that without the same replacement funding, it will be increasingly difficult for colleges to support local economies and wider society.
We know this is just one example of the harm caused by the lack of clarity and commitment from UK ministers. First Minister, will your government raise with your UK counterparts the concerns of the FE sector here in Wales?
We will certainly do that. We do this at every opportunity. It falls on very deaf ears. The Welsh Affairs Committee of the House of Commons, chaired by a Conservative Welsh MP, said themselves that they were disappointed that the UK Government appears to have made negligible progress in developing its replacement for ESI funding, and that its repeated promises of a consultation have failed to materialise, demonstrating a lack of priority. Our colleague, the Counsel-General, wrote to Robert Jenrick, the member of the Cabinet responsible for the Shared Prosperity Fund, on the 12th of October, asking for a meeting to discuss matters in relation to education and all the other things that have been supported by EU funding in Wales. We're yet even to receive a reply, let alone to have a meeting. And Vicky Howells is right to point to the importance of this funding in our further education sector. And there it is not simply a matter of the quantum of money, but it's the fact that under European funding you had a 7-year multi-annual funding framework, so that if you're going to bring apprentices through the system, you can't do it in a single year. You need to be able to plan over years ahead so that you can employ staff, you can develop facilities, you can offer guarantees to those young people. We don't know even how much money we have coming from next year, let alone the opportunity to have that guaranteed over the sort of period that we've previously been able to enjoy, with all the benefits that Vicky Howells noted.
Question 6, Joyce Watson.
Clywyd, what discussion has the First Minister had with the UK Treasury regarding VAT on personal protective equipment?
Thanks, Joyce Watson, for that. Clywyd, the Minister for Finance and Trefnydd wrote to the Financial Secretary to the Treasury on the 30th of October to ask that the decision to reinstate VAT on clinical PPE with effect from the 1st of November be urgently reconsidered.
I thank you for that answer. But it's actually unthinkable that the UK Treasury would add VAT to PPE, and the impact that that surcharge would have on small businesses across Wales, who are rightly trying to do the right thing for their staff and for their customers to keep those people safe. And also for charities and third sector organisations who are providing direct help to people in communities right across Wales, and again trying to keep those people safe. So will you ask again the UK Treasury to not force this safety tax on Welsh businesses, charities and third sector organisations?
Well, I thank Joyce Watson for that and entirely agree with her. It's unfathomable to me as to why the UK Government has decided that this is the right moment to add additional costs onto essential safety equipment. We are providing PPE on an industrial scale in the Welsh NHS and social care system. 440 million items of PPE already this year, of which 220 million have been provided to social care providers. It will cost, in the Welsh system alone, an extra £20 million, which is money now we don't have to provide services for cancer patients and cardiac patients, all the other things that members on the Conservative benches have been asking me about this afternoon. That money will now be handed back to the Treasury as a result of this decision. But Joyce Watson is very right to point to the impact on small businesses and charities here in Wales. Organisations that are really struggling during the pandemic, whose business model has been very badly affected by it, who are trying to do the right thing, who are spending money on PPE for their staff and sometimes for customers. Now they will be paying that. No, Andrew Arty-Davis suggests to me they'll just get it back. Well, small businesses which are not VAT registered won't get it back at all. Charities which are VAT exempt will not get it back at all. So I'm glad to see him defend it. I'm glad to see that he thinks it's a good idea that a safety tax should be introduced here in Wales. It tells us a lot about the priorities of people on those benches, that they're willing to pontificate when they think it suits them, and then when something as ridiculous as this happens, they're prepared to defend it as well.
Question 7, Dawn Bowden.
Stand up.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the most recent COVID-19 infection data in the Merthyr Tydfil local authority area?
Merthyr Tydfil local authority area has seen a high incidence of COVID-19 infection in recent weeks. The increase in incidences seen throughout Wales was the reason we introduced a fire break. There are early signs of an incidence rates decrease in Merthyr Tydfil and elsewhere in Wales.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. And people are naturally relieved that we've now left the period of the fire break. However, the data for Merthyr Tydfil does remain worrying. And while it's true, as you've already stated, that the initial indications from the fire break appear positive in the area, we clearly need to continue behaving in ways that reduce the risk of infection, in the hope that over the next 2 weeks, the positivity test rate continues to reduce. And like you, I'm certainly pressing that message at every opportunity. But also important, First Minister, were your comments yesterday that you're monitoring the success of the whole town testing pilot in Liverpool. And I understand that active consideration is being given to this being done in Merthyr Tydfil. So following on from your answer to Adam Price on this point earlier, can you confirm when we will get a decision on this and when such a mass testing programme in Merthyr Tydfil specifically would be likely to start? And can you reassure me that discussions are taking place within Welsh Government about the logistical challenges of such a process and the many practical consequences that might arise, including ensuring that local authorities will have the adequate resources available to them to support such a programme, particularly in relation to track and trace and community support?
So I thank Dawn Bowden for that, and thanks to her for everything I know she is doing, as are other colleagues, to get that message across to people in different communities in Wales, that while we all feel a relief at the end of the fire break period, it's how we behave in these next 2 weeks which will be absolutely crucial. And if people turn a sense of relief into a sense of not doing the things that we all need to do, then we will simply lose all the benefits that we have achieved together through the way in which the fire break period in Wales was observed. So I thank her very much for everything she is doing to reinforce that message. I'm happy to confirm again that there is a planning team in place. It's led by Cwm Taf Morgannwg University Health Board. It's with the local authority, and its purpose is to plan for whole borough testing in Merthyr. That team will be joined by 3 military planners on Thursday of this week. They will be individuals who have direct experience of what has been happening in Liverpool, and they'll bring all of that to that planning group. But it is still planning, and it's planning not simply for the testing, but as Dawn Bowden has said, for the aftermath of that testing, because when you find many, many more people who have tested positive, you need teams in the TTP system then to follow them up and make sure that they are properly advised. All of that needs to be in place in order to make sure that people in Merthyr, if that is where we have a first whole town testing in Wales, that they get the service that they need, and that's what that planning is designed to achieve.
Cynwala cwestiwn 8, Jane Bryant.
Diolch, Llywydd. How is the Welsh Government supporting schools throughout the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank Jane Bryant for that. Llywydd, we continue to work with schools and local authorities to provide ongoing support based on the latest scientific and medical advice. The Minister for Education has published operational guidance for local authorities working with their schools to ensure schools remain as safe as possible.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. The dedication and flexibility that the education sector has shown throughout this pandemic has been remarkable. Online learning, extensive health and safety protocols, bubbling, and the whole arrangement of school buildings has seen teachers and staff do everything in their power to ensure that pupils have as little disruption as possible. Despite these efforts, there are challenges. It's quite right that a lot of attention has been put on what that means for pupils in exam years, but there's an issue across all age groups, with early years and primary schools in particular seeing children needing to catch up on basic skills, and this is a problem across the UK. This has potentially long-term consequences, ones that will be felt after we have finally passed the worst of the pandemic. I've no doubt that teachers will do all they can to support their pupils, but they will need significant support along the way. What plans does the Welsh Government have to address the progress gap in children's education, and what additional resources can we provide our schools to help them achieve this?
Well, thank you, Brian, for that question. And of course, at the heart of the Welsh Government's response is the Recruit, Recover and Raise Standards programme that my colleague, the Education Minister, launched earlier in the year. And that is designed to give schools the resources they need to recruit additional staff to deal with exactly the issues that Jane Bryant has identified, the progress gap and the impact on learning that has taken place as a result of coronavirus. Now, my understanding is that schools are using that money in imaginative ways. They're recruiting new staff and new teaching assistants, but they are also extending the hours of part-time staff, deploying people in more flexible ways. And all of that is designed to do what Jane Bryant has suggested, Llywyd, to make sure that the resources are there, financial and in staff terms, to make sure that those young people who've missed out on education through no fault of their own because of the impact of the pandemic can make good on that deficit as much as possible during what are still very challenging weeks that lie ahead.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.